Hi, this is Dale Rhoda. Welcome back to the Survey Scholar video series for analysts in Module A3. We're going to spend a few minutes now talking about different options for displaying confidence intervals graphically. And this is going to be not so much a how to make the graphs, you can figure that out, or we can help you do that, but this video is more conceptual than hands-on. You probably know from looking at some of the course materials so far and possibly from reading coverage survey results that this is by far around the world the most popular way, the most common way of showing estimated coverage. So we just have a bar and a bar graph, maybe with a nice scale, maybe not, and then maybe at the tip of the bar we represent the estimated coverage. In this case, there's no indication of the sample size, there's no indication of the confidence interval. In this case, because the graph doesn't have a label, we don't know, is this a national estimate or sub-national estimate? So we don't know if it's precise or not. And so this is very unsatisfactory. The revised manual recommends that coverage estimates come with some indication of what the sampling variability is. Now, this is another common depiction that we see in scientific reports and survey reports and sometimes in coverage reports, where we show the estimate still with a bar graph perhaps, but at the tip of the bar there's a one-dimensional representation of the 95% confidence interval, and sometimes it's listed in text like this. We have the point estimate and then the lower and upper limits of the 95% confidence interval. This is much preferable to the first option. Here's a third option where it's exactly like the second, but we've just dropped the bar. In many cases, the bar doesn't actually carry any information. There's nothing going on here to the left of the point estimate. All the information is really carried by this representation of the confidence interval. We have the point estimate and the confidence interval. So in many cases, you could safely drop the bar from the picture and keep it from distracting your readers. Now, the next two representations are new with this set of guidelines. The Inchworm plots were really developed by our company for these guidelines and for the field of vaccination coverage, although they're applicable in any other kind of sampling inference as well. So this is an Inchworm plot. I'm going to talk about some details about what all the pieces of the Inchworm plot are in this video. You see here that the base of the Inchworm plot, as it's depicted here, corresponds exactly to the 95% confidence interval. So the width, the bottom, is just like the one-dimensional representation, but now it has a 2D feature to it. It has height as well as width, showing you that the survey proportion is much more likely to fall near the point estimate than near the ends of the interval. Maybe we knew that conceptually down here, but there's no way to tell from this representation how much more likely the proportion is to be at the point estimate than at the ends, and this figure makes that very explicit, the sort of the relative likelihood. And this figure also includes these two tick marks which show the one-sided 95% confidence bounds, and we'll talk about those more in a moment. And finally, the final representation on this slide is that you could include the bar when you use the Inchworm, or you could leave the bar off. It's a matter of taste. Our convention in the Wiki software is to list the point estimate in the center and to list the one-sided bound on the left here and list the one-sided upper bound on the right. But the software also includes options. You can list the two-sided interval. You can list whatever you like, whatever you think will be most useful to the readers, but you want to indicate with a note. So here we have a footnote that says the text beside the inchworms is the one-sided bounds surrounding the point estimate. So just a few minutes conceptually, we'll back up and talk about the really three confidence intervals. We've been talking about two-sided confidence intervals and how to estimate them using different pieces of software. And you remember that a two-sided 95% confidence interval lists the limits where if we chopped off 2.5% of our probability or our confidence from the left side and 2.5% from the right side, then the points where we would do the chopping, that defines the two-sided confidence interval. Well, a one-sided confidence interval, a useful one-sided, also 95% confidence interval, says let's only do the chopping on the left. Let's chop off 5% of our confidence or our probability from the left side and identify what we call the lower confidence bound. And so then we're left with a new 95% confidence interval. It's one-sided. The lower bound can vary depending on the sample, but the upper bound is always going to be 100% for this second conceptual interval. And we can say we're 95% confident the coverage is above this lower bound. Similarly, we could chop off 5% of our confidence or our probability from the upper end of the distribution and identify an upper confidence bound. And we can say we are 95% confident that coverage is somewhere below, somewhere between 0% and this upper confidence bound. So these are three useful 95% confidence intervals. No one of them is any more or less valid than the others. They're all only valid if you've done a good job of keeping bias out of your survey. But instead of representing them using a stack of three distributions like this, which would take up a tremendous amount of room, in the Inchworm plot, we consolidate them into a shape like this, where we show the two-sided interval graphically, and we show the one-sided bounds with small tick marks. And you can display as much detail as you want along with it. These are the limits of the two-sided interval, and then this is the one-sided interval that goes from 0 up to the upper bound, and this is a one-sided interval that goes from the lower bound up to 100%. So I hope that's helpful. We call them inchworm plots because we feel like they're shaped a little bit like an inchworm that's just getting ready to take a step. When the proportion is estimated precisely, that's what it looks like. When their proportion is estimated imprecisely, then the inchworm plots are stretched out, and they look like an inchworm that has just completed a long step. So that's why we call them inchworm plots. But I hope you'll be able to remember that an inchworm is just a stack of confidence intervals. At the base of the stack is the 95% confidence interval, and then we just keep stacking intervals on top, and we stack them vertically. Then we close in the stack and paint it all one color, and we add those tick marks. But the stacking happens such that the area is a meaningful quantity. The area that you see in the inchworm represents, each dot of ink represents a constant amount of confidence, of inferential confidence after you get your sample. So different intervals show up as some are taller, some are wider. They all have the same area. And again, just to emphasize the interpretation here, there are three confidence intervals, so we can say if the survey is free of bias, then we are 95% confident that coverage falls within this two-sided interval. We are also 95% confident that coverage falls above the one-sided lower confidence bound, somewhere between there and 100%. And just as valid, just as proper to say, we are 95% confident that coverage falls somewhere between the upper bound and 0%. I hope this has been helpful. If you have questions, post them in the community update where you found the link to this video. And if that's not working for you, or that's not how you found the video, then send us an email. Thanks so much.